then we can start, and then let's start letting people in when it goes to 7.
Okay. Right, I'm gonna mute myself and just turn off my video because no one needs to see.
Dave, I'm talking at Sandeepa's conference on mining space at 2:30 in the morning tonight.
Oh, wow. Good luck with that.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. We'll just wait another couple of moments for anyone else to join us, and then we'll make a start. Okay, well, welcome to this CND webinar entitled Crowded Space, Why the Increasing Militarisation of Space Could Risk Nuclear War. This is CND's contribution to Keep Space for Peace Week, which is now a really established fixture on the International Peace Calendar. It's been around for about 2 decades, highlighting these crucial issues, and was founded by the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. So this is a really crucial issue for us. We're very aware that the increasing militarisation of space is contributing to a wider problem too. Space is becoming dangerously crowded. Currently, there are 27,000 human-made objects floating in space, and there are plans for this number to increase sharply. Billions of pounds are being spent by multiple countries, including the UK, on militarising space. And of course, this includes satellites, ground-based stations, and new technologies such as armed drones controlled through satellites. Not surprisingly, therefore, a crowded space has major implications for security, including increasing the risk of nuclear war. So these are just some of the really important issues that our speakers are going to be touching on this evening. So we're very fortunate to have a very expert panel. A big welcome to them, and thanks for sparing the time. First of all, we're going to turn to Dave Webb, who is convener of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, and he's co-author of the new report entitled Heavens Above, examining the UK's militarisation of space. So, Dave, I think you've got a PowerPoint there to share with us, so I'm hoping our technical person behind the CND symbol, there we are, screen sharing. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks very much. Excuse me. Yeah, as Kate said, this is Keep Space for Peace Week. It's part of the United Nations kind of general call for World Space Week. You can see their poster on the left there. It's an astronaut carrying a briefcase. I don't think that happens actually in real life very often, but you can see that kind of gives you an image of business and corporate kind of identity with space. Whereas the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space poster on the right-hand side warns of the dangers of crowded orbits, as Kate has mentioned already. And as of January this year, there were over 6,700 operational satellites in orbit around the Earth, and nearly 6,000 of those are in low Earth orbit. And there are tens of thousands of discarded objects and debris from collisions. And the problem is that if all of this stuff builds up, it could lead to all sorts of problems with actually sending more space missions up. So the problem is increasing as well, because private companies like SpaceX, OneWeb and Amazon are proposing to increase the total number of satellites to over 100,000 in the next few years. So it's set to become even more crowded up there, with the possibility of cascading collisions, causing a situation where we can no longer send rockets up into space. Satellites are used for many things these days, and the space business is becoming huge. It looks like becoming worth $1 trillion by 2040, and everybody wants a piece of that. Governments, aerospace corporations, and also the military. And spending on space programs is increasing, as you can see here from this figure. And the military has become dependent on satellites for all sorts of operations, for surveillance, communication, intelligence gathering, command and control, early warning, operating drones, and so many other things. And the UK is taking space development very seriously. In 2018, the UK Space Agency paid Lockheed Martin, the world's biggest arms producer, £23.5 million to identify suitable UK launch sites around the country. And the annual MOD report for 2020 to 2021 stated that space is fundamental to military operations and underpins our ability to undertake the majority of defence tasks. The UK's military space programme is managed by UK Space Command, which was established in 2021 and works with both civilian and commercial partners, and also with international partners. So space is a big and expensive operation to enter into alone. And 2 months ago, the UK Space Agency disclosed the first beneficiaries of a £20 million international bilateral fund aimed at fostering links with the UK, with the US, with Canada, Australia, Japan, and a number of other countries to advance space research and technology. In particular, the UK and US space commands work very closely together, and the US and they have signed an enhanced memorandum of understanding to deepen military cooperation in space. It was the US Space Command, don't forget, that in 1997 released its Vision for 2020, which described the goal of the US to achieve full spectrum dominance. That is military superiority on land, at sea, in the air, in space, and of information. And the US Space Force, created by Donald Trump in 2019, has a number of divisions called deltas to carry out specific space operations. And the UK is already directly involved with many of these activities through US bases in the UK, like Fylingdales and Menwith Hill up in Yorkshire, and Croughton down in the south there. In particular, the UK Space Agency is supporting the development of 3 rocket launch sites proposed by Lockheed Martin. These are at Saxon-Ford Spaceport on the Shetland Islands, Space Hub Sutherland in Scotland, and Spaceport Cornwall at Newquay Airport in Cornwall. Developers of the launch sites always promise jobs and income and commercial and all sorts of things for local inhabitants to get involved in. But and they also say that there'll be more commercial launches rather than military launches. But experiences from other launch sites around the world, especially in America, show that these promises usually go unfulfilled, and that most of the flights are actually going to be for the military. And concerns of local residents don't seem to count for much either. The launch sites in Scotland are in remote areas with fragile ecosystems and pose a threat to seabird colonies, grasslands, and overall biodiversity. There's been opposition to the Scottish spaceports from local residents and environmental groups, but planning permission has been granted nevertheless. And in Shetland, work continued on the site there even before the closing date of the consultation period. Just a few days ago, there was a protest outside the Scottish Parliament highlighting concerns about the proposed Scottish spaceports and their environmental impacts and their role in bolstering militarism. An example of the military use is the failed attempt to launch satellites from Cornwall last January. If successful, it would have taken 9 satellites into orbit, of which there were 2 dual satellite systems, that's 4 mini satellites for joint US-UK military programs. They were to pave the way for wider collaboration to help develop joint support systems for warfighting in space. The failure of the launch ended in bankruptcy for Virgin Orbit. There had been protests the previous October at Spaceport Cornwall because of the military connection. And although some launches may be for commercial companies, Alexandra Stickings, a space analyst at the Royal United Services Institute in London, has said, "I'm of the opinion that the proposed spaceports would need the MOD as a customer to survive, as well as securing contracts from companies such as Lockheed." In August, the UK Space Agency released a report outlining 11 areas of technology to propel the nation further into space. Among them were artificial intelligence and space nuclear power.
Got a minute left, Dave.
Okay, I'm just closing now. The nuclear industry is always looking for business. Small generators, such as produced by Rolls-Royce for nuclear submarines, to power lunar and Martian colonies. These will be essentially military bases and or sites for companies to exploit lunar and Martian resources. So we're also, of course, familiar with Rolls-Royce reactors because they're in nuclear submarines, especially the ones that carry nuclear weapons for the British so-called deterrent. So I think that's probably enough from me, and I'll look forward to the question and answer session and pass on to the next speaker. Thanks very much. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Dave. That was really fascinating. And this is a good point, thinking at which to thank anyone here present who was active at the protests in Cornwall, because that obviously was, played an important role there. I know CND and Drone Wars UK were both active down there at those protests. This is a good point also to mention the Q&A box at the bottom. So once our speakers are finished, we're looking forward to putting your questions to them and getting some good discussion going about these issues in more depth. Meanwhile, it's a great pleasure to welcome our next speaker, Mélusine Lebret. She's an academic at LSE European Institute, specialising in outer space security. So, Mélusine, you're very welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that and for inviting me today. I really think that space is an incredibly fruitful sector for research, because there are so many activities that can be done in this actual space, and so it's really a subject that is close to my heart. I guess what I really wanted to outline today was, after the brilliant presentation of Dave, it's really about giving a context on how everything that is going on right now with the increasing militarization of space, how to label all of this and how to categorize basically what the militarization of space means and what kind of threats we can expect. So I think it's really to be, first of all, it's important to distinguish the use of space for military purposes and versus the installation of military capabilities in space. So there is the placement of weapons in space. So we have kinetic weapons and non-kinetic weapons. Kinetic weapons have been, so both of those types of weapons are present on an equal capacity, and so basically kinetic weapons have the capability to destroy objects that are both in space but also on Earth. And so Earth to space weapons include anti-satellites, or known as ASATs missiles, and these weapons basically create huge amounts of very dangerous space debris and threatening any basically other orbiting spacecraft on a collision course. And so basically kinetic weapons that are deployed in space have really similar capabilities to weapons that can directly crash into explode targets in space. And so they offer really considerable advantages in conflicts, since they can target obstacles both in space and on Earth, but they really do pose significant threat to national security, and so challenge the national defense in unconventional ways because of how they apply into realms that have not the same kind of law frameworks. And then non-kinetic weapons are also very interesting to study and are being very also nowadays a great focus of many countries and private companies, because they include lasers, jammers, electromagnetic pulses, and high power damage or disturb objects in space without direct contact. We could also include spacecraft that are aimed at tracking and examining.
Sorry to interrupt, Mélusine, but
satellites,
Mélusine,
because they can interpret.
Sorry to interrupt. You're breaking up a bit. I wonder if it's possible to turn your screen off so we can just hear you. I think that might make the reception a bit better.
Sure.
Thanks.
Absolutely. No worries at all. Please let me know if you can hear me.
That's better.
Feel free to interrupt me. Amazing. Yes, basically spacecraft can be also used as non-kinetic capability, and those kinetic, non-kinetic, and non-kinetic space weapons have are really important now today, and especially the latter, because of the fact that the space industry is utilizing emerging technologies, including 5G, advanced satellite system, 3D printing, big data, and quantum computing to upgrade and scale operations in space. Here we find also planetary exploration, space tourism, and countries putting space stations in space as well. And what's very important here is that anything that is put in space will have a dual use purpose. And so basically we have different kind of weapons that are, and both those categories have a dual use aspect. And anything that is put out there in orbit and further is also of dual use. So it's very difficult to distinguish between commercial, civilian, and military capabilities whilst trying to basically having satellites running. But I guess what I really want to also mention here as a final point is that with all of those categories of technologies put in outer space, the aspect of putting a nuclear weapon in space is particularly dangerous, and is basically the main threat that we want to study here, because if a nuclear weapon is exploded in a vacuum, so for example, like in space, the complexion of weapon effects really changes drastically. So first, because in the absence of an atmosphere, the blast would basically disappear completely, and then the thermal radiation would also disappear. And so because there's no longer air for the blast wave to heat, and so there's a much higher frequency radiation that is emitted from the weapon itself. So basically, in the absence of the atmosphere, the nuclear radiation will suffer no physical attenuation, but the only degradation in intensity will arise from a reduction with the distance, basically. And so as a result, they would have a significant dosages that would be many times greater than what it is the case at the sea level, so basically on Earth. Yes, basically space is definitely a very extreme environment for weapons and for humans. And so it's every time that there's a capability that is built there, it has to be really handled with all the care in the world. Yeah. So yeah.
Thanks very much, Mélusine, and sorry about the sound there for you, but we got that very clearly eventually. Thank you. So now turning to our third speaker, it's a real pleasure to welcome Bruce Gagnon, known to many of you, I'm sure, if you're active in this sphere. He's co-founder and coordinator of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. So Bruce, over to you.
Thank you, Kate. Good evening, everyone. I've been asked to speak about strategy a bit. I think one of the most important things is to recognize the public around the world doesn't know much about this issue, and this is the reason why we organize Space Week every year. I urge people to go to our website. Dave Webb is actually our webmaster, in addition to the convener of our board of directors, and he does a fantastic job on the site. And in the menu, look for the resource section, and there you'll find a load of videos. We actually have hired someone to make a short space video every month for us on a different aspect of the issue. And so over time, people can really begin to learn much more about everything that's going on. So we urge you to go there, check those out, and share them with others so people will also learn. Launch sites are literally exploding around the world. The US is pushing in many, many places to get these launch sites done as quickly as possible. And I believe the main reason is two things. One is to get more satellites launched into space to fill up the declining orbits in lower Earth orbit. It's like a parking lot at a supermarket. The parking spaces are declining, and the West wants to fill them up before Russia and China get a crack at it. And so as these things are sold as civilian objects, civilian launch sites, we find the military takes them over. And so we've got to really work in harmony with each other around the world who are opposing them. Here in my state of Maine, the state government has created a consortium that is now pushing the construction of 2 launch sites in our state, one to send satellites for the Space Force into lower Earth orbit. And at a recent meeting that we had at a country fair, myself and another person spoke there, and the executive, the CEO of one of these companies came and surprisingly to our presentation, and he acknowledged that the reason why they want to launch these things is to keep Russia and China out of lower Earth orbit. So it's military confrontation is happening now about the declining spaces in lower Earth orbit. The second launch site they want to start in Maine would be testing hypersonic rockets. So we're now raising money to buy radio time, radio ads and newspaper ads to alert the people of this region in northern Maine about what's going on. Another thing is astronomers are very upset about the loss of the dark sky because of all these satellites orbiting the Earth and blinking away at night. And so we've tried to reach out to astronomers who are beginning to get organized around all of this. So there have to be limits set on the number of satellites that can be launched. And so our astronomers are really one great base of support that we should all work harder on to nourish. The costs are so obvious. The environmental cost, Dave talked a bit about that. The money cost is just astronomical. In the United States, one of the industry publications years ago said that we must come up with a dedicated funding source to pay for all this. And we have, and we're sending our lobbyists to Washington to secure it. And they said it's the social programs, welfare, Social Security, what Medicare and Medicaid for the elderly and the poor. These are the programs they said they're out to defund in order to pay for the militarization and weaponization of space. And so clearly we need to make those links when we talk about these spaceports that are being developed in your country and around the world. We need to talk about how, you know, that money is going to come from human needs, environmental cleanup, et cetera, et cetera. And the obvious militarization of space is a massive cost. And we must all learn more about how that would play out in the times ahead. One of the things that we should be talking about in terms of the crowded orbits is this Kessler syndrome. There's a guy working at NASA's named Kessler. He's come up with this theory that seems quite real in the present day. And it's as we put more and more things into orbit, the chances of cascading collisions multiplies dramatically, especially when there's already so much space junk orbiting the Earth. And when that happens, there'll just be this cascading collision, one thing crashing into another. And before long, guess what? Things on Earth go dark. GPS, cell phones, internet banking, weather prediction, air traffic control, and so many other things that we do on the planet today are hooked up to satellites. So if we have this Kessler syndrome start, we are in big, big trouble. So we need to be talking about that now. Here in America, it's the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, that is in charge of authorizing the numbers of launches that are going forward. They are required by law to demand environmental impact statements for any corporation that wants to launch satellites, but they've not been doing it. They've just been rushing because they want to fill up these parking spaces. So the Global Network is part of a legal effort underway now to force the FCC to begin to comply with the law. So I think we have to look for all those kind of avenues to try to get our governments and the agencies that are responsible for overseeing this, because there's virtually no regulation now whatsoever about what goes into space, how many things can go, where they can go, et cetera, et cetera.
2 minutes left, Bruce.
Okay, just to give one example, the United States, as countries are preparing to go out and mine the sky, Dave at the end showed a little bit about mining, space mining, and nuclear reactors to be used for space mining, Rolls-Royce working on it. In a document published in 1989, paid for by the Congress of the United States, it's called Military Space Forces the Next 50 Years. In that document, the United States government, this was a government document, said that we've got to develop the ability to deny other countries access to space. We've got to control the Earth-Moon gravity well, meaning that think of a wishing well. If someone's at the bottom of a well and you're at the top, because of gravity, you hold an advantage. Well, the same is with space. So they say that with bases on the moon and with armed space stations on either side of the moon, the US would be able to control who gets on and off the planet, and that they could hijack rival shipments upon return. So we're talking piracy here. And this is the planning that's been going on for years in terms of who's going to be able to get into space, who's going to be able to mine the sky, who's going to be authorized, okay, by the Western powers. And that's why we see today so much effort being made by the United States to get the allies to help pay for this robust military space militarization program. And but remembering that the US would be in charge of the tip of the spear, the allies would just be players, as they are in all US wars, with the US in charge of the overall operation. So these are the dangers that lie ahead. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Bruce. So we've got a huge amount of information and food for thought from our expert panelists. So please do keep those questions coming. I'm going to put the first 2 or 3 to our panel now. So I'll read them out, and then I'll come to each of you in turn. If you want to comment on any aspects of those, you're very welcome to do so. So the first one is, how are the Trident nuclear weapons submarines linked into space systems? That's a good question there. Then the 2 and 3 have a lot in common, but with slightly different aspects. Firstly, how do the panelists think space could be used most effectively for the benefit of life on Earth? And can space exploration play a positive role for humanity? So that's first round of very interesting questions. Dave, I'm going to go to you first.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, the title of this is something to do with connection with nuclear war. So it's a good question about how Trident subs are linked to the space systems. I think I used to think at one time that the Trident missiles would be guided by space satellites to their targets if they were ever fired. But that's actually not true, because actually space systems are very vulnerable. So you can't guarantee that the satellites would be there in order to guide the missiles. So actually they use the stars, the position of the stars, funnily enough, to actually, well, not funnily enough, you can recommend that they're still going to be there, most of them anyway. So they use that. I think the connection actually is in terms of early warning, because we have here in this country Fylingdales, which is an early warning radar as part of the US early warning system, and also Menwith Hill, which downloads information from the space-based early warning satellites that are up there. Now, the problem here is that if something should go wrong with one of the satellites, maybe it would hit a piece of debris. There's quite a lot of debris out there, as we've heard, or hit by a meteorite, or there's just a general technical malfunction. If one of those satellites would go out at a particular time of high tension, such as now, for example, where there's lots of military activity in so many different places around the world, it might be construed as an attack. And if it was construed as an attack, then that could set off all kinds of processes which could end up in a nuclear war. So it's really vital that we actually make sure that that this doesn't happen, that we don't have that kind of situation occurring. And I don't know, some people may remember back in 1983, in September of 1983, one Colonel Petrov, who was at the command center for the Soviet Union, early warning command center, his systems indicated that a nuclear weapon had been, or at least a missile had been fired from the United States towards the Soviet Union. So it was a warning sign. Warning signs were flashing all over the place. He thought, and then another warning system came up saying 4 more had been fired off from the United States. He thought this was odd, because you wouldn't just fire 5 weapons in a nuclear at first strike. You'd fire hundreds. So he kind of thought it was a false alarm and ignored it. He should have passed it on to the next level. And if he had done that, there would have been repercussions. The Soviet would have had no choice really but to fire something in retaliation. Now, luckily, he was right. It was a false alarm. And the problem was a problem with the satellite early warning systems that the Soviets were using. So again, there's a problem here with connecting satellites, nuclear weapons. We've got to make sure that these kind of situations can no longer arise. Either we try and make sure that the satellites are robust, which is extremely difficult, or we get rid of nuclear weapons, which is a much better idea and should be saving a lot of money for everybody, really. I've left no time for the other questions. I'm sorry, but I'm sure the other people can sort them out.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. Thanks, Dave. That was really interesting. Always good to hear about Colonel Petrov. I know he's a great hero of Bruce Kent's, wasn't he? Okay, Mélusine, share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, so I mean, I would like to answer the question on how space can be effectively used on Earth, and then how space exploration can also help. So there are, as Bruce said, there are so many activities that we have here on Earth that would not be possible without the use of capabilities that are in space. So yeah, and navigation, healthcare, healthcare assistance, and a lot of anything that's related to internet and to connection, but also using observation from satellites helps actually studying the degradation of the environment, helps observing the movement from people, helps with building of cities, of roads, and actually is a way to also uncover political activities, illegal political activities in certain regions that would not be possible to see unless they were observed from the sky. So a lot of the technologies that are being developed are about basically improving the quality of images that are out there. And obviously the way to bring back satellites after they have observed after they have filled their purpose. That's also something that's the sustainability aspect that space is really trying to actors in space are really trying to fill out. But then, so that's how there's certain perspectives on how space can be beneficial to the activities on Earth, but also space exploration. So discovering the perspective of potentially discovering new planets and anything that would be on other planets is already something that is incredible. It's already a huge cultural shift. It is a shift in paradigm as well, in the way that we see humanity, we see the place we live in, the globe, and all of that. And so it is space exploration in that sense. Helps the way that we think about the future, and the way that we interpret the future, and the way that we can interpret also the human life and human cycles. So that's definitely something that should be looked at more closely from anthropologists and people who study the human behaviors, because having that perspective of discovering new planets, or maybe seeing a new planet when we see images of Mars, or seeing Earth as it is from space, is already something that humans are not very used to do. So it really provides a lot of opportunities to perhaps see a lot of things differently.
Thanks very much. Bruce, over to you.
Well, I see there's a question about treaties in the UN.
Well, I was going to come on to that in a bit. So could you do the first two, and then I'll put those to everyone after, if you don't mind. Otherwise, you'll mess up my system, Bruce.
Oh, I mean, I'm a radical at everything I do. Well, honestly, I don't think I can add more to Dave's very good explanation, and I think the last explanation was quite good. So I don't feel any need to comment on either one of those. So if you would just allow me to go on
Okay.
to this next.
Okay, so let me put those to the whole panel, and so everyone knows what they are. So this is our next two questions. What public oversight is there via democracies with parliaments and via the UN for the militarisation and commercial use of space? Does the Outer Space Treaty help? And then the second, if they mine a ton of ore on the moon, can they re-enter it to Earth? If so, at what cost? And then I've got another one here. Whatever happened to the Paros Treaty? That's the prevention of arms race in outer space. So it's a few treaty ones there for you. Dave, you go first.
Well, I thought you might give it to Bruce as he was kind
Yeah,
of
no. I mean, Bruce, go first.
Right.
Okay. I thought I was being penalized there for a moment.
Not at all, Bruce.
Okay. It's a really important question about the treaties. The Outer Space Treaty that was created in the 1960s was essentially created to make sure that we didn't blow each other up by putting nuclear weapons in space permanently and then using them against other countries. So there was a lot of mutual agreement on the need for that. So they banned weapons of mass destruction in space. Some years ago, I was reading Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine. There was an article about a war game that the Space Command had just done, where they were practicing US first strike attack on Russia and China using space technology. And in that war game, they turned to the lawyer, the military lawyer sitting by the computer, and said, can we use the military space plane, what today is called the X-37, that's shown that it can stay in orbit for a year at a time, fly down from orbit, drop an attack, part of a first strike attack. And they said, can we use that in this attack? And he said, yes, it won't violate the Outer Space Treaty because it's not a weapon of mass destruction, it's a weapon of selective destruction, and therefore falls outside of the parameters of the treaty. So with that in mind, for the last, 25, 30 years, annually, Russia and China go to the UN, bringing Paros, a resolution to the General Assembly where it passes overwhelmingly, except for the US and Israel and the latest lackey like Ukraine, for example, in this last vote. And then it's sent on to the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva for negotiation. And Paros stands for Prevention of an Arms Race in Outer Space, a new treaty catching us up to date with all the technologies, all the new definitions that are necessary. And at that negotiation process, the United States and Israel have been blocking it for all these years. And during Republican and Democrat administrations, Washington has said repeatedly, hey, there's no problem. There are no weapons in space. We don't need a new treaty. We're fine. We don't need it. And so that's where we are today. So yes, we need a global movement, a global cry for a new treaty tomorrow. And then just a word about the question about mining things. How do you get it back to the earth? How do you move things around? First of all, the nuclear industry views space as a new market. They want to have nuclear reactors to run mining colonies on the various planetary bodies. They want to have nuclear rockets with the capability of heavy lift, ability, so that they can carry things out to the planetary bodies for mining operations, and then also bring things back. In fact, the nuclear rocket engines, NASA will soon be testing them just over our head in lower Earth orbit. And when NASA was asked, why are you going to test them over our head? I mean, that's dangerous. What if they fall back down to Earth? They said, well, by law, we're not allowed to test nuclear reactor firing the engines on the ground on Earth. because of environmental law. So we've got to go into space to test them. So, I mean, that's problematic as hell. Obama, when he was president, signed a new law allowing U.S. Corporations and individuals to go out and make land claims on the planetary bodies for mining. This is in violation of the Outer Space Treaty and the Moon Treaty, which says the heavens are the province of all humankind, and no country, no individual, no corporation can make ownership claims.
Thanks very much for that. Very interesting. In fact, when I first got involved with CND, there was a lot of talk about Paros Treaty. I know that was something that Dave introduced me to. It's a great thing, and let's hope that eventually it gets brought into law. Mélusine, would you like to have a go at any of those?
I mean, I think, yeah, Bruce said it all, but it's just about the Outer Space Treaty. Perhaps there is something just that I would like to add from an academic point of view, is that the way that legal norms work in high seas could be very well applied to the way that space could be regulated. And so the Outer Space Treaty provides a lot of very mainstream sort of fundamental norms, but not legally binding ones. So there are obviously lots of UN open and working groups that are really working to have that. But of course, it's the UN. But international law, and as I said, the regulation of high seas could be an inspiration to build on the Outer Space Treaty, rather than doing a new treaty that would basically make everyone go backwards, and all countries to go backwards. So it's really about building on the treaty with existing mechanisms that can be applied to the extreme environments that space is.
Brilliant. Dave, over to you.
Yeah, not much to add really, except that it's worth reading the Outer Space Treaty because it's great in principle. It's a wonderful principle that outer space should be a global commons. Unfortunately, it's also subject to a tragedy of the commons, where the people who have the most grab the most. And that's what happened with the commons on Earth, and it may happen too with the commons in space too. So it's well worded for the time, but it's out of its time really, because there's been so many technical developments that the Outer Space Treaty needs a big kick. It needs something to bring it up to date, or new treaties, whichever. I don't mind whatever we get. Just one other thing as well about the mining situation. We talked about the possibility of nuclear power on the moon or on Mars to establish bases, but nobody's ever mentioned how they get rid of the nuclear waste that's produced on those, theoretical bases. That's never come. I've never seen anything mentioned on that. So it looks like we're set to kind of pollute other planets and other bodies in the solar system in the same way as we've done it on Earth. And I don't think that's a really good way. That would go against the spirit of the Outer Space Treaty, if not the letter of it.
It's pretty unbearable, isn't it? I mean, anyway, that's what we're about, isn't it? Stopping that. Right, so I've got 3 final questions that I'm going to pose to the panel. So again, take your pick, and also as you conclude your remarks, maybe if you've got any final comments you want to make to the panel or the audience, feel free to do so, and that will probably take us up to our 8 o'clock finish time. So okay, so here goes. here's one, I think that's in response, Bruce, to what you were saying about Obama. Did the US lawyers not tell Obama that his law about commercial ownership of space was illegal? Commercial ownership of space bodies was illegal under international law. Did the UN not object? Then we have, what role does military space technology play in wars today? Very topical. Looking forward to hearing the answer to that. And then finally, how can we get more people involved in this area of campaigning? So, Bruce, over to you for first stab.
I'm sure that Obama was told that by someone, that, you know, he was violating the letter and the spirit of the Outer Space Treaty. But we got to remember that at the Space Command headquarters in Colorado, above the doorway, their logo reads Master of Space. And this is literally the ideology, I think that's the right word, of the US when it comes to space. And that Vision for 2020 planning document that Dave showed early on in his presentation said that the US will control space, dominate space, and deny other countries access to space. So we're going to be the master of space. And remembering that the US space program was created by the Nazi scientists that came to the US after World War II under Operation Paperclip, von Braun and 100 of his rocket team and 100 of the V-2 rockets. I wonder if there was an ideological contamination, not only of the space program, but the entire military industrial complex, because 1,500 Nazis were seated throughout the entire US military industrial complex at that time. And since World War II, I think the United States has been acting much like the Nazis. Today, Starlink has launched 13,000, SpaceX rather, has launched 13,000 Starlink satellites into space. And they want to do 40,000 more in lower Earth orbit, again, filling it up before Russia and China can get there. They've been supplying Ukraine with Starlink so that they have communication within their military via Starlink, and then also that they can better target Russian military and even Russian targets inside of Russia, into Moscow and various other parts of Russia, hitting civilian targets. So Starlink has proven that it can be very useful, and it's called a dual use satellite. It's not originally, its purpose is not a military satellite, but all satellites anymore, if you got the money, the United States buys its way into lots of dual use satellites by different countries. I want to also just add that Israel has been testing their Iron Dome missile defense system in the United States at Kodiak Island, Alaska, which is a pristine island famous for salmon, bears, and bald eagles. And that launch facility was promised to the community of Kodiak that organized against it to try to stop it, that it would only be civilian, and all they've ever had there have been military launches. And so now Israel is testing their military operations inside of the United States.
Thanks very much, Bruce. That's great. Did you want to comment at all on how we can get more people involved? I know you're a pretty active campaigner yourself. No? Okay, Mélusine, would you like to have a last stab there at those answers and any concluding remarks you wish to make?
Yeah, I think about campaigning, it's just, I think, also a very good form of campaigning is doing research, just like I do. I think it's really great to gather as much as information and put them together. Look at the problem with all of its facets, because that's where you find a solution. Yeah, I mean, for me, yeah, space is a big passion, and you discover new things every day on how you can preserve planets from future pollution, or you can preserve the sky from being obscured, or anything that can basically improve the quality of living, and the quality and the preservation of the cosmos and our galaxy as a whole. So yeah, I think yeah, researching, reading about it, and being curious about it is already a great first step.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much indeed, Mélusine. And then Dave, over to you for your last thoughts and concluding words. I'm going to look to you now then to also to talk about how to get more people involved in campaigning in this area.
Yeah, I don't think Bruce heard you when you asked him, so I'll hopefully answer in his stead. Really, through events like this, I think it's really important. Like Bruce said, not many people know about what's happening in space and the militarization of space. We do tend to hear about the glory of space and the fantastic news and discoveries that are made through the space probes and the space rockets that are sent out to outer planets and so on. And that's wonderful stuff. It's really good stuff. Or we hear about the environmental monitoring that they do and all of the, the good things, basically. We hear about the good things, but we don't hear too much about the dark side. And that's something we need to kind of get people to understand what's happening. So these kind of events like we have now and what we've been doing for this week at various places around the world, there have been people organized for Keep Space for Peace Week in South Korea, in Jeju Island, and in America, in the UK, and elsewhere. They go to the local kind of base or a local company that's involved in the militarization of space and take banners and try to get local people to understand what's going on in their neighborhood. And that's what we have to do too. We need to make sure people are aware of what's going on. But it's only really through an outcry from the people that anything will change, any change will come. I think governments don't seem to be able to move very fast or very willingly on these kind of issues. So it's really up to us. So CND has always been a good supporter of the work of the Global Network and Keep Space for Peace. So let's try and keep it up and accelerate our work even more, I think. And I would say thanks to Bruce, who's been a fantastic kind of organizer throughout all of this for the last 25, 26 years, whenever it's been mainly due to him that we are aware of what's going on at the moment. So thanks, Bruce.
Absolutely, 100% concur with that. So big thank you to all our speakers this evening. It's really, really interesting. I'm certainly going to watch it back because, I think I need to listen to it all again to really get the most out of it. And I'm pleased to say that the recording will be posted on CND's website, and everyone who has signed up for this Zoom will receive that link directly into their email box. And please do share that and get it round as much as possible. I think it'll be really helpful in our campaigning on this going forward. So thanks, everyone. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Again, a big thank you to our speakers. Big thank you also to Podrick, who's behind the CND symbol, for doing such great tech this evening. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Kate. Appreciate it.
Bye.